7 in the morning, November 5th, 2005. Frost sits on the flat fields of Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, and the wind coming off Lake Michigan carries the smell of cold iron. At the end of a dead-end road called Avery Road stands a salvage yard that covers 40 acres and holds close to 4,000 wrecked vehicles, stacked in long rows like the ribs of some enormous animal. A woman named Pam walks into that maze with her grown daughter Nicole, a small camera, and a pair of binoculars. She is a distant relative of a 25-year-old photographer who vanished 5 days earlier, and she has spent years working as a private investigator. Calumet County detectives have given her permission to search 20 minutes in, near the eastern edge of the yard where the crushed cars give way to a tree line. She sees something that does not belong. A curve of teal paint, not rusted, not crushed. Branches have been laid across it. A car hood rests on top of that. Beside the hood, a sheet of plywood leans against the body. The license plates are gone. To understand what that teal vehicle meant, you have to go back and meet the woman who owned it. Teresa Hulbach was 25 years old, one of 5 children raised in a large Catholic family in the farm country of Calumet County near a crossroads community called St. John. Her parents, Tom and Karen, raised their kids around chores, church, and county roads that ran straight for miles between dairy operations. Teresa graduated from the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay and did the thing that terrifies most people her age. She built her own business from nothing. Photography by Teresa, weddings in small parish halls, senior portraits taken against corn stubble in late autumn light, family sessions where she coaxed 3 generations into holding still for 8 seconds. She was the one behind the camera at other people's milestones, which is why so few good photographs of her exist. Photography did not pay every bill, so Teresa took contract work with Auto Trader magazine. The job was simple and it was steady. Sellers across the region would list a vehicle, the Auto Trader office would set an appointment, and Teresa would drive out with a clipboard, shoot a handful of photos, collect a small fee, and move on to the next address. Some days that meant 3 stops, some days it meant 6. She kept a printed route sheet on the passenger seat with names, addresses, and times, and she worked out of a 1999 Toyota RAV4. Teal, bought used, the kind of small, dependable vehicle a self-employed woman buys when she is counting every dollar. She coached a local middle school volleyball team in her spare hours. She rented a house. She went to her mother's kitchen for Sunday food, and she was saving toward something bigger. She was not a statistic waiting to happen. She was a young woman with a route sheet and a full calendar. The country she drove through that autumn was quiet in a way that city people romanticize and rural people simply accept 2-lane highways. Hand-painted signs, advertising, firewood, and sweet corn grain silos catching the last orange light. Manitowoc County and Calumet County sit side by side, and in both of them, everyone is connected to everyone by 3 degrees at most. There is a church, a tavern, a volunteer fire department, and a scanner in half the kitchens. Salvage yards are part of that landscape too, sprawling private kingdoms behind chain link and cedar brush, where families make a living off what other people wreck. By the last week of October, the fields were cut down to stubble. The wind had teeth and plastic skeletons hung on porch railings. It was Halloween, week 2005, a single county line away. Another story was already being told about that same landscape, and it had made one local family famous. On September 11th, 2003, a 41-year-old man named Stephen Avery walked out of a Wisconsin prison after 18 years inside. He had been convicted in 1985 of a violent attack on a woman named Penny along the Lake Michigan shoreline and sentenced to 32 years. He had insisted from the first hour that he was somewhere else. He had a store receipt from Green Bay stamped with the time. He had a long list of family members who backed him. None of it outweighed an eyewitness identification and a hair comparison, and the jury believed the state. Then, in 2002, lawyers with the Wisconsin Innocence Project won an order for modern testing on a hair recovered in the original case. The result pointed at a different man, Gregory Allen, who was already in prison for another attack. The failure ran deeper than bad science. Years earlier, a detective from a neighboring county had telephoned a Manitou County detective and raised the possibility that Gregory was responsible for the beach attack. That call went nowhere. No file was reopened. No one told Stephen, and no one told his family. And he stayed in a cell for 8 more years while the paperwork sat still. So when he came home as a symbol. Newspapers photographed him in a work shirt. State lawmakers used his case to push through a reform package on eyewitness procedure and interrogation recording. And in 2004, he filed a federal civil rights lawsuit seeking $36 million from Manitou County. From the sheriff who ran the department in 1985, and from the district attorney who prosecuted him. That case was not an abstraction in October of 2005. It was live depositions were being taken. The county insurance carrier had balked at coverage, which meant former officials were staring at personal financial ruin. Stephen himself was back working the family yard on Avery Road, crushing cars, living in a trailer at the front of the property with his fiancée Jody. His parents lived in the house next door. His brothers worked the yard. His sister Barb lived in another trailer on the same land with her sons. To anyone driving past, it looked like an ordinary working family at the end of an ordinary gravel road. That is exactly what makes this story so hard to sit with. Monday, October 31st, 2005, Teresa had a light schedule and a route sheet with 3 stops on it. One was for a private cellar, one was near the village of Whitelaw, and one was on Avery Road where a 1989 Plymouth Voyager minivan had been listed for sale under the name of Barb, the sister who lived in the trailer behind the salvage yard office. Teresa had photographed vehicles at that property before. It was a known address to her. A routine call, 10 minutes of work. The phone records from that day would later be examined line by line, and they tell a strange story. At 24 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, a call reached the cell phone of Teresa from the cell phone of Stephen Avery. The caller used the star 67 feature, which blocks the number from appearing on the receiving handset. 11 minutes later, at 35 minutes past 2, a second call came from the same phone, again with the number hidden. Teresa left a message for another seller on her list saying she was on her way. Then, at 35 minutes past 4 that afternoon, a third call went from the same cell phone to hers. That one carried no block at all. The number showed. Between those calls, Teresa drove down Avery Road past the office into a 40-acre yard surrounded on every side by fields and woods, with a single way in and a single way out. And after that afternoon, her cell phone activity stops. The messages her family left began stacking up in a mailbox. Nobody was checking. Tuesday came and Teresa did not appear where she was supposed to appear. Wednesday came and the silence hardened into something else. Her family knew her habits. Teresa returned calls. Teresa kept appointments. Her brother Mike and people close to her started dialing her voicemail, calling clients, calling anyone on her route. On Thursday, November 3rd, her mother Karen contacted authorities and filed a formal missing person report. Calumet County took the case. Because Teresa lived on that side of the county line, flyers went up within hours. Her face photocopied onto white paper and stapled to telephone poles and tacked inside gas stations from Chilton to Two Rivers. Local television led with her name, and the family did what families in that part of Wisconsin do. They organized. Dozens of volunteers, neighbors, teammates, parishioners gathered to walk ditches and fence lines and gravel pits. Investigators started where any competent investigator starts. They pulled her Auto Trader assignment sheet for October 31st and worked the 3 addresses in order. 2 of the stops checked out and led nowhere that left the property at the end of Avery Road. Detectives drove out and spoke with the family. Stephen told them he had seen Teresa arrive, that she photographed the minivan, that he paid her for the work in cash, and that she drove away. Nothing unusual, nothing to report. Deputies noted his account and moved on to canvass the surrounding roads. But there was a problem hanging over every single step of that inquiry, and every officer involved understood it. The man at the center of the last known address on the route sheet of a missing woman was the same man suing Manitowoc County for $36 million. With depositions of former county officials underway that very month, whatever happened next would be examined for the rest of their careers. By Saturday morning, November 5th, the search had grown into a coordinated operation with grids, sign-in sheets, and radios. And a woman named Pam, who had once worked cases for a living, asked for permission to walk the salvage yard itself. She was handed a camera and a set of directions, and she and her daughter Nicole drove through the gate at first light. The call went out at 7 minutes before 11 that Saturday morning, and within the hour the end of Avery Road looked like a staging area for a small war. Calumet County sergeants secured the teal vehicle where it sat roughly 100 yards from the eastern tree line, backed in among a row of crushed sedans on a 2-track lane of packed dirt and shattered glass. The plates were gone from both bumpers, a car hood, and a sheet of plywood had been set against the body, and cut branches lay over the roof. Nobody opened a door, nobody reached inside. The vehicle was photographed from every angle, wrapped, loaded onto a flatbed, and hauled to the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Madison, more than 150 miles south. Then came the jurisdiction question that would shadow every hour of the next 16 months. Stephen was suing Manitowoc County for $36 million. His lawsuit named the former sheriff and the former district attorney by name, and depositions were being taken that very autumn. So the Manitowoc County sheriff announced that Calumet County would run the investigation. It sounded clean. It was not. Because there was no written order, no statute, and no signed protocol that actually removed Manitowoc County personnel from the property. What existed was a verbal understanding that Calumet would lead and Manitowoc would provide support. Support meant manpower, floodlights, generators, heavy equipment, and deputies who had grown up in that county and knew the yard. Over the following 8 days, more than 200 officers moved through those 40 acres, and Manitowoc deputies walked the same ground as everyone else. The geography they were searching was cramped and layered. At the front of the property stood the salvage office. Behind it, Stephen lived in a single wide trailer with his fiancée Jody. A detached garage sat a few steps off the back corner of that trailer, close enough to reach in 5 paces. Just outside the back wall of the garage was a burn area, a shallow, blackened depression ringed with scrap and tire debris. And a short walk across open ground stood the trailer where his sister Barb lived with her sons, with a rusted burn barrel behind it. On November 6th, investigators seized a .22 caliber rifle, a Marlin Glenfield, from a rack above the bed in Stephen's room. That same day, they spoke briefly with Barb's 16-year-old son Brendan, a quiet boy who worked part-time at a fast food restaurant and rode the special education bus. The laboratory work began immediately, and the first results reshaped everything inside the passenger compartment of the teal vehicle. Analysts documented 6 stains. All 6 returned a DNA profile matching Stephen. There was staining in the rear cargo area that matched Teresa. There was no fingerprint of Stephen anywhere in that vehicle, not on the steering wheel, not on the door, not on the console, which the defense would later argue was impossible for a man who had supposedly bled inside it. Then, on November 8th, The seventh entry into that trailer produced the single most contested piece of evidence in Wisconsin criminal history. Lieutenant James and Sergeant Andrew, both from Manitow County, were working Stephen's bedroom. Andrew later testified that he twisted and shook a bookcase near the bed, and papers spilled onto the floor. Moments after that, James spotted a single key on the carpet, near a pair of slippers, in a room that had already been photographed, cataloged, and walked through 6 times by multiple agencies. It was a spare key to the teal vehicle. It carried Stephen's DNA. It carried none of Teresa's, even though she had driven that vehicle every working day of her life. The same day brought 2 more discoveries: a volunteer with a local fire department, walking a row near the front of the yard, found Teresa's license plates crumpled inside an abandoned station wagon. And in the burn area behind the garage, investigators found charred material tangled in the steel belts of burned tires. It was human. Dr. Leslie, a forensic anthropologist, would examine the recovered fragments and determine they came from one adult individual and that they had been exposed to sustained extreme heat. Additional charred fragments were recovered from the burn barrel behind Barb's trailer, along with the melted remains of a camera, a cell phone, and a Palm Pilot. On November 11th, the crime laboratory confirmed the identification through DNA, using a reference specimen obtained from a medical clinic. A 25-year-old woman with a route sheet and a full calendar had met a brutal, permanent end within a few steps of a working family's back door. Stephen was taken into custody on November 9th on a weapons charge, and on November 15th, the state filed the charge that carried a life sentence. Then the case slowed to a grind, and the grind is where the real work happened, through the second half of November and into a Wisconsin December. Teams sifted the burn area through screens in temperatures that froze the soil solid. Heavy equipment opened a nearby quarry, and searchers examined pit after pit of gravel, recovering additional charred fragments. Investigators logged hundreds of items from the yard, including bleach, cleaning materials, and the contents of the garage floor. And they ran luminol across that concrete, looking for what should have been there and largely was not. They pulled cell tower records and reconstructed the Star 67 calls minute by minute. They re-interviewed the family members who lived on that land one at a time, and they kept circling back to the quiet boy in the special education classes. Because Brendan had been at the property that afternoon, and his account kept shifting in small ways. On February 27, 2006, investigator Mark and special agent Tom pulled him out of school for another conversation. School records available to them showed a profound language-based learning disability, a reading comprehension level years below his age, and testing that placed his intellectual functioning at the borderline. He was a child who answered questions by agreeing with whoever asked them. March 1st, 2006. Brendan was interviewed at a Manitow County facility for roughly 4 hours across 2 sessions. No parent sat beside him. No attorney sat beside him. His mother had signed off on the contact by phone. The full interview was recorded on video, an irony so sharp it is almost unbearable, because Wisconsin had strengthened its recording requirements in part because of what happened to his uncle in 1985. On that tape, the investigators tell him more than 40 times that they already know the truth and that honesty will help him. He offers a version. They reject it. He offers another. They reject that too. He guesses. He goes silent. He looks at the floor, and when he cannot produce the specific detail they want about a wound to her head, they eventually name it for him, and he repeats it back. At the end of it, he asks whether he can get back to school in time for a class project, because he did not understand that he had just handed the state a life sentence. His statement was riddled with details that no physical evidence supported, including events inside a trailer bedroom that showed no forensic trace whatsoever. The next day, the special prosecutor stood at a podium and read a graphic narrative of those allegations to statewide television. Every potential juror within 100 miles heard it, months before a single witness was sworn. That statement also redirected the physical search. On March 1st and 2nd, investigators returned to the garage for another examination of the concrete, an area that had already been processed months earlier. Inside a crack in the floor, they recovered a small, deformed .22 caliber bullet fragment, cataloged as Item FL. Manitou County personnel, including Lieutenant James, were present for that search. The state laboratory matched the fragment to the rifle taken from above Stephen's bed to the exclusion of every other firearm. Analyst Sherry then tested the fragment for genetic material and developed a profile matching Teresa, but her own DNA had contaminated the control sample during that run. Under the laboratory's written protocol, contamination of the control required the result to be declared invalid. She contacted her supervisor. Her supervisor authorized her to report it anyway. Meanwhile, the boy, at the center of it, was being failed by the one person paid to protect him. His appointed attorney, Len, told reporters that his client was, in his words, morally and criminally responsible before he had reviewed the discovery. Len hired his own investigator, Michael, who ran Brendan through a polygraph, then sat him down with pen and paper and pressed him until he wrote out a statement and drew diagrams. The following day, Len permitted investigators to interrogate his 16-year-old client again and did not attend. A judge removed him from the case that August. The trials were severed, meaning Brendan's words could not be used against Stephen, and Stephen's defense turned toward a single explosive theory. In December of 2006, his attorneys examined a box of old evidence held in the Manitou County Clerk of Court's office, material from the case that had wrongly imprisoned him for 18 years. The evidence tape had been cut inside, sat a vial of his blood drawn in 1996 with a small puncture in the rubber stopper. Halloween night, 2005, picture the geography one more time. Because the state built its entire case on how small it was, Stephen's trailer sat at the front of the 40-acre yard. The detached garage stood 5 paces off its back corner. Just beyond the garage wall lay the burn area, a blackened depression ringed with scrap steel and tire debris, close enough that a person standing in the trailer doorway could feel the heat of a fire in it. Barb's trailer stood across open ground with a rusted barrel behind it. That evening, while children in Manitou County walked the shoulders of county roads with plastic pumpkins, a fire burned behind that garage. Stephen never denied it. He told investigators he had a bonfire that night, that he burned tires and brush, that it was nothing unusual. Family members placed the flames somewhere between waist-high and shoulder-high. Nobody driving past a salvage yard on Avery Road would have looked twice. That is the part that stays with people, not a remote cabin, not a basement in a stranger's city. A working family's backyard, a routine appointment on a clipboard, a fire that looked like every other fire on every other autumn night in that county. The trial opened on February 12, 2007, in the Calumet County Courthouse in Chilton, a modest brick building on a quiet street about 30 miles southwest of the salvage yard. The jury was drawn from Manitou County, the very county Stephen was suing, then sequestered in Chilton and bussed in each morning past satellite trucks parked along the curb. Judge Patrick presided, Special Prosecutor Ken led for the state dean, and Jerome sat for the defense. Over 5.5 weeks, the state called dozens of witnesses and stacked the exhibits in front of that jury one at a time. 6 stains inside the passenger compartment of the teal vehicle, each carrying Stephen's genetic profile staining in the rear cargo area carrying Teresa's. Sweat recovered from under the hood latch, a place a person only touches by reaching into the engine bay, carrying his profile and not hers. Her license plates crumpled inside an abandoned station wagon in his yard, a spare key to her vehicle on his bedroom floor. Her electronics reduced to melted plastic in the barrel behind his sister's trailer. And in that burn area 5 paces from his back door, charred fragments of one adult human being, identified through DNA as the 25-year-old photographer who had driven down that road to take 4 photographs of a minivan. Then the state answered the defense theory head-on. Analyst William testified that the deformed .22 caliber fragment recovered from the crack in the garage floor, catalogued as Item FL, was fired from the Marlin Glenfield rifle taken off the rack above Stephen's bed, to the exclusion of every other firearm on Earth. And on February 28th, an FBI chemist named Mark took the stand to address the vial. The defense had shown the jury a box in the Manitou County Clerk's office with the evidence tape cut and a small puncture in the rubber stopper of a 1996 blood specimen. If that blood had been taken from the tube and smeared inside the vehicle, it would carry the chemical preservative that keeps stored blood from clotting. Mark testified that his laboratory had developed a test for that preservative and run it on swabs taken from 3 of the stains in the passenger compartment. He found no trace of it. The blood in that vehicle, he told the jury, came from an actively bleeding source. The defense attacked the method as rushed-built for this case in a matter of weeks and pointed out that only 3 of 6 stains were ever tested. It did not matter. The jury had heard a federal chemist say the word no, but the defense had its own hour, and it landed hard enough that people still argue about it. Dean and Jerome never had to prove who was responsible. They only had to prove that the men gathering the evidence had 36 million reasons to want a particular result. They put Sergeant Andrew on the stand and played a recording from November 3rd, 2005. 2 days before Pam ever walked into that yard. On it, Andrew reads a license plate number to a dispatcher, and the dispatcher tells him it comes back to a 1999 Toyota registered to Teresa Halblash. Andrew testified he was simply checking information from a report. The defense asked the obvious question, how do you read a plate number to dispatch on a vehicle that will not be discovered for another 2 days? They walked the jury through the spare key that surfaced on the 7th entry into a bedroom already photographed and catalogued 6 times. Found by 2 Manitou officers who were never supposed to be leading anything. A key bearing Stephen's genetic material and none from the woman who drove that vehicle every working day. They put analyst Sherry on the stand and made her explain that her own DNA had contaminated the control during the testing of Item FL, that her laboratory's written protocol required the result be declared invalid, and that a supervisor authorized her to report it anyway. Deliberations began on March 15th. One juror was released for a family emergency and replaced by an alternate. For roughly 3 days, 12 people from the county at the center of a $36 million lawsuit sat in a room and faced a choice with no comfortable exit. Either a coordinated effort by law enforcement had manufactured evidence against an innocent man for the second time in 22 years, or the most famous exonerated man in Wisconsin, the face on the reform posters, the neighbor at the end of the gravel road, had used his freedom to take a young woman's life and had then stood in his own doorway and watched a fire burn. At 2:12 in the afternoon on March 18, 2007, the jury returned guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, guilty of felony possession of a firearm, not guilty of mutilating a corpse, a split that legal analysts still call one of the strangest verdicts in state history, since the state's own theory placed the fire 5 paces from his back door. On June 1st, 2007, Judge Patrick imposed life in prison with no possibility of release and added 5 years on the weapons count. Brendan went to trial separately that April in the same Chilton courtroom. His attorneys argued the videotaped statement was the product of suggestion and put on an expert in false confessions. Investigators had told a 16-year-old boy with a documented language disability more than 40 times that they already knew the truth. His own first attorney had called him responsible to reporters before reading the discovery, hired an investigator who pressed him into writing a statement, then allowed police to question him again without showing up. None of it moved the jury. On April 25, 2007, Brendan was convicted on all counts, and on August 2nd he received a life sentence with parole eligibility set for the year 2048. When he would be 59 years old, the systemic failures did not stop at the courthouse door. Stephen's federal lawsuit over the 18 years he lost was settled for $400,000 while he sat in jail awaiting this trial, and nearly all of it went to pay the lawyers now defending him. Ken, the prosecutor who read graphic allegations to statewide television months before jury selection, resigned in disgrace in October of 2010 after it emerged he had sent sexual messages to a domestic abuse victim whose case he was prosecuting. His law license was later suspended. Penny, the woman attacked on the lakeshore in 1985, had already lived through the discovery that a Manitou detective was told years earlier that another man might be responsible and did nothing with it. She then had to live through this. Teresa's family absorbed the worst of it. Her parents, Tom and Karen, her brother Mike, and her siblings sat through weeks of testimony about the last 4 photographs their daughter and sister ever took. Then, in December of 2015, a 10-part documentary series arrived on a streaming service and made the case a global argument. Strangers dissected the family online. A petition asking the President of the United States to release both men gathered more than 129,000 signatures, until the White House responded with the plain legal fact that a president has no power to pardon a state conviction. The appeals have run for nearly 2 decades. A federal magistrate judge overturned Brendan's conviction in August of 2016, finding the statement involuntary. A panel of the 7th Circuit agreed. Then the full 7th Circuit reversed that ruling in December of 2017 by a vote of 7-4. And the Supreme Court of the United States declined to hear the case in June of 2018, leaving the sentence intact. A clemency petition to the governor was rejected. Stephen's post-conviction work passed to attorney Kathleen, who has filed motion after motion arguing new scientific testing, an alternative suspect inside the family, and the state's failure to disclose that recovered bone fragments were released to the family without notice to the defense. Wisconsin appellate courts have rejected each of those filings, and in May of 2025, the Wisconsin Supreme Court closed the state courthouse door for good. As of August of 2026, Stephen, now 64, remains at Fox Lake Correctional Institution, Brendan. Now 36, remains at Oshkosh. Kathleen and allied advocacy groups have turned to executive clemency and a federal habeas corpus petition as the last available paths. Encouraged by a new commutation advisory board created by Governor Tony in April of 2026, 2 men remain locked up. A county's reputation remains in ruins, and a young woman who ran her own business, coached middle school volleyball, and kept her route sheet on the passenger seat is still the only person in this story who was never given a second chance.